screen. Welcome to our webinar about aiding your diocese with resources for diocesan directors and denominational leaders who help local churches with stewardship. Now, stewardship is very close to my heart. I've always envied people who got the idea of stewardship by a rigorous spiritual life, perhaps one that paralleled St. Ignatius of Loyola, who dedicated a part of the time every day to reflection and discernment. I was not so deep. I got my lesson about stewardship at the wrong end of a gun. I had taken a 5-day float trip down the Congo River in 1979. I had a job working for the American Embassy in Kinshasa. It was my first job after school. Actually, my mother had a similar job. Her first job out of college was working for the American Embassy in Iceland. So I grew up thinking that was normal. So I had an opportunity for an exotic job in a wonderful place, and of course I jumped at it. And on my vacation, I took this 5-day float trip down the Congo River and ended up in Angola. And I walked into a war zone, not knowing it was a war zone, ended up with a gun to my head, and that was the first time in my life I actually prayed and meant it. Fortunately, the prayer got traction, and I lived. That shock awakened me to how my life is a blessing, and everything that happens in my life is a blessing. And I am to be a conduit for the blessings that God has given me. So since then, I feel like I've been in overtime, extra minutes, extra innings. So generosity has become an easy thing for me because I realize I'm in extra minutes. So I'm very, very full of gratitude that my life has lasted this long. So that key attitude about stewardship has kind of driven me in my work. I've worked with more than 200 churches in their capital campaigns, and I've learned a lot along the way. And I'm going to share some of that with you. And I'm blessed to have a more brilliant person who's helped me create this webinar, Jeremy Lillig, who is the Director of Stewardship for the Diocese of Kansas City, St. Joseph. He's brilliant. Now, unfortunately, at the last moment, he was called away to be with a top donor. So I said, Jeremy, if you've got a chance to make $1 million, go do that right this minute. So that's where he is. God bless him, and let's hope things work out well. So here's the title of the webinar. This is me. I've been at this since 1992, and then from 82 to 92, I worked for a secular organization, helping nonprofit organizations do strategic planning and accounting. I wanted to help churches, and they were too secular. They said no. And they didn't want to do fundraising either. So I said, well, in 92, I've got to start my own business. So I did. And I'm an author too. I've written 4 books and numerous articles, and stewardship is kind of my obsession. It's a lot of fun for me. Now, forgive me, I've got to wear this little orange microphone to facilitate the technology of this webinar. My friend and co-worker, Meredith Snyder, whose picture you see there as well. She's our technical director here at Church Development. We've got a dozen co-workers that are spread out across the country, but she's the one with the technical expertise that keeps things running. Now, this is our company, Church Development. I started in 1992, and collectively, we've got about 300 years of experience from all the different staff people spread out across the country. And our singular focus is to help churches with stewardship. We do stewardship-based capital campaigns, and it's kind of our testing ground for our obsession about stewardship. We keep track of lots of variables. This is our picture of our website. I welcome you to go there. It's got lots and lots of free resources. And it's got that story that I just told you about our beginning. It's got a little footage from the Congo and from that river. It's kind of fun that I was able to find that. Now, on your screen, you see lots of different options that you can click on. And one of those is you can send me a note. As we go, I would welcome your input, your feedback, and your questions. So we'll go about 40 minutes, and I welcome your input as we go. And we've got an enormous amount of material to cover, so forgive me. Meredith has warned me sometimes I go into information overload, but we'll move quickly. But we've always got a lot of room. I'm hoping, received an email yesterday from Meredith asking about questions and concerns that you might have that we could address. And we have got a list of a sheet of questions that we're ready to address right now on related to our topic of how a diocesan director of stewardship can help a local church. So your Zoom menu has that button. Please click it at any point in time. It's that Q&A button. And when I see a question pop up, we'll pause and direct that. And it's kind of funny. The very first question is the question whenever we do a webinar on a related subject. And the number one question we get most frequently, which we got in this past week, was, why don't people give generously? And that's a good question. And the number one answer is that they were not asked. So it's up to us to be a facilitator of the giving process, of the stewardship process. We are servants of the donor. I really like Robert Greenleaf's term, the servant leader. He says those of us in leadership really are not at the top of the pyramid. We're at the bottom. We're a little bit like Sisyphus, and that pyramid rests upon us. We're meant to guide and lead by facilitation, by asking the right questions and engaging people so that they own the process. So it's not a top-down sales pitch. So while you're thinking about it, please send me a note. Tell me something that God has blessed you with. Tell me what you'd like to get out of the webinar today, and give me your toughest question. Even the toughest question that you might have heard before today, and I will tackle that. Now, our agenda today has these 4 parts. And I like the 4th part myself because it's, what does success look like? And we're working on a book called The Secret Life of Tithers. That's this micro view of the individual. What does their life look like? In my many decades of this work, they've self-identified to me. And they say the same statements. It's fascinating. I'm sure they don't know each other, but they say the same things. They say things like, we look for things to give our money and our time to. We're constantly searching. They always talk about the mystical part of stewardship. They say, God has blessed me with everything that I have, and the better I am at sharing, then the more God blesses me with. It's a fascinating insight, but we're really looking on the macro view. So item 4 in our agenda is, what does an institution, what does a local parish, and what does a diocese look like when stewardship is cooking right along as it should have? Now, to get there, we look at the problem as given. The study of synectics is a study of group problem solving. So we always begin with, what's the presenting problem? And then we begin to peel back the layers and look underneath. So if we do a good job analyzing the problem, the solution becomes a little bit more clear and easy to implement. So we're going to dig down and look at the causes, and then we're going to address that question. For you as a director of stewardship, what can you do as a servant to those parishes that you serve? Then we'll wrap that up with, what's the problem look like when it is solved? Now, let me tell you about my co-conspirator on this guy right here, Jeremy Lillig. We've been friends for many years. We worked on a $20 million diocesan campaign together. He has risen through the ranks, coming to serve the church from the nonprofit world. He is a CSJA, an associate of a religious order. He has a deep spiritual life, and he's a very competent manager. You see that yellow banner? The news just came out last week that he was recognized as the Nonprofit Executive of the Year by the Kansas City area Nonprofit Connect organization. And he deserves it. He wears multiple hats, from overseeing the diocesan annual campaign to serving parishes to really serving as the director of development, the director of advancement from a brand new school that we've started here in this diocese in Kansas City, Missouri. He wears many hats and he does them all very well. So he's helped me design this workshop. As we were preparing this, as we began our deliberations long ago, we began with that presenting problem, and he showed me this very cute picture. He says, this is how I feel half the time. Parishes come to me and they say, we're desperate, we need money, I'm overwhelmed, where do we even start? And he says, this is how I look, but in reality, sometimes that's how they look as well. They're good-meaning people with hearts of gold, but they're in an all-out panic. So one of his most common questions, how do we communicate what stewardship is? Because people still suffer from that fatal flaw of thinking stewardship is fundraising. I've done a lot of fundraising. I've had many non-church fundraising clients, and it's a subset of marketing. It is an exchange of value for value. The stewardship is fundamentally different. I really like the scripture that comes from 1 Peter 4:10 that says, all of us have been blessed with something. It's up to us to figure out how we are to use that blessing for the benefit of humankind. Now, it's much more eloquent than I can paraphrase, but 1 Peter 4:10 is very direct. Frequently, directors of stewardship in a parish don't get it. So stewardship education, we know, is a critical problem. And then the second most common question is, how do we get people involved? Well, as I present this webinar, I'm going to share a lot of materials with you. And if I had that book right here by my hand, I would hold up that seminal work by Richard Zeck from Villanova that's titled, Why Catholics Don't Give. It's a scalding analysis of the flaws of the institution that really that help us understand how we fail. We know that we're a failure. It's a good glimpse into why we fail. Now, the evidence says that Catholics give just 1.2% of their income to the church. Now, that's not entirely true. I just finished working with Holy Trinity Parish and their director of stewardship, Jeremy Heinen, on a $3 million capital campaign. And we always work with a parish for 3 years on their stewardship efforts connected to the capital campaign. So he was able to increase annual giving 20% in his first serious go at improving their stewardship effort. Now, admittedly, he had room to grow. That parish was only giving 0.9% of their income to the church. So we could grow by a third just to hit the national average. Well, we did take a big jump that first year. We had a successful capital campaign, and then the annual campaign the year after that had a significant increase as well. But still, when you look at the national institutional average at 1.2%, we are not doing well. Our Protestant brethren give 2.2%. So we know it's the same socioeconomic strata, the same number of people in each group in this country. So we know that giving more is possible. Only 5% of the population actually does tithe. We know that all groups have pretty significant room to grow. 95% of us do not tithe. Now, looking below the surface on that, only about a third of our people pledge. Only about a third of our people volunteer on a regular basis. Now, it used to be a third, and a third. Gallup polling in their instrument, the ME25, has informed us that it's a little worse than that. Only 15% of our population are actually deeply involved who attend, give, and volunteer on a regular basis. Now, Matthew Kelly has a less scientific approach, but he thinks it's just 6%. So the truth probably lays somewhere in between there. So we're struggling, and underneath that, we know that only about a third of our congregants actually volunteer. Now, this is a critical, that's the tip of the iceberg. That's a critical number to remember. Now, Fidelity Fund in 2009 examined the giving habits of volunteers, and they discovered that an active volunteer gives 11 times more than a non-volunteer. That's a multiple of 11. That's 1,100% larger. So if that's all you needed, if that's all you knew about stewardship, that's the one thing that you could do today to increase generosity, increase volunteerism. Now, the underlying causes, here's a great graph. Only half of all churches do an annual campaign. Only about 20% have a stewardship committee. Only about 1% teach stewardship on a regular basis. Less than 1% have a culture of stewardship where the language of stewardship is evident and in use every single day. So this is a great diagram to see where we are lacking as a church, and this has important implications on what success looks like in the future. Now, underlying all of this is most people don't get the idea of stewardship. They don't understand that everything that they have comes from God, that everything is a blessing from God. They don't get that. They think they created everything. They forget for a moment that their very life, their health, their environment, their family, their society, everything about their world, even the air that they breathe, is a gift from God. And if it's gone, life changes rather dramatically. So now we as a church, we do not help the problem. We don't even talk about stewardship. We don't ask. We don't educate people to let them know what stewardship is. We don't pray about discerning God's will. We don't recognize that everything we have is a gift, and dear God, help me figure out how to use it to do your work here on the ground. One of our worst sins is we're not transparent. We are obfuscative. That's a word I learned from my daughter. We're cloudy and shadowy. And I mean, every Sunday bulletin ought to have financial information in there. It ought to have our objectives, our targets. It ought to have our threshold, minimum threshold we need to operate. We need to be transparent about the number of people who are giving, how much they're pledging. We don't list names, of course, but we need to be transparent. Financially, all that information needs to be available. Leadership needs to be clearly evident and interacting all of the time. I'm a big fan with town hall meetings. One of my heroes, Paul Turner, was the pastor at Jeremy's church, Jeremy Lillig's church. St. John Francis Regis. He used to once a month at the end of church, just during announcements, say, hey, please stick around. We're going to have a town hall meeting. And it'll only take 15 minutes, but we need your input. So you know how we are. Half of us run for the exits like the building's on fire, but half the people stayed. And he did not change his robes. He just pulled a chair and he sat down. There was a microphone here and a microphone there. There was a flip chart. He asked people, he said, here's our problem. What do you think? And it's not a democracy, but we want your input. It was a brilliant man. It was a strategic movement on his part to increase generosity. Now, what can you do as a denominational leadership in stewardship? Well, I've been around enough where I know that every parish wants you to come to their parish to meet with the parish council, the finance council, and stewardship volunteers and hold their hands. Well, that's not going to happen. That's just impossible. I know you would like to, and you're probably gifted. It would be a fun thing to do, but it's just not possible. So the question is, how do we scale your efforts and automate? That's a question straight from the business sector. How do we scale it so to make it widespread, so it's not just one church, but everybody has access to it? And how do we automate it so it doesn't have to be you with hands-on for every single church? So we've got some ideas. We call it simple stewardship, taken from a book called Simple Church, which was very, very similar to the research done in the book Rebuilt. So they examined what are the healthy structures that are in place that make churches that are growing and healthy operate. And here are the three things that we discovered. Number one, they have a stewardship council. Somebody is in charge. So you as a diocesan director of stewardship can lay down the law. Now, canon law says you got to have a finance council. In the recent histories, or in my lifetime, parish councils have become a high priority new organization within the structure of a parish. And I am proposing that you as a director of stewardship, when you get a phone call from a pastor or a volunteer or a staff person, the first thing that you say is, do you have a stewardship council? If not, you have to get one. And when you have one, then you can call me back and I will help out. But I'm not going to help out if nobody is in charge. And it's just as bad if the finance council is in charge. They're wonderfully gifted people, but their gifts don't fit with stewardship. Their gifts fit with managing, tracking, and being prudent expense administrators. And that's a whole different way of thinking than stewardship. You want more marketing-oriented people on the stewardship committee. The second key to success for a diocesan director of stewardship is get comfortable with a constant flow of education going out. We really like the idea of an annual diocesan stewardship conference where you pull people together, you have a handful of speakers, you have somebody good speaking at lunch, but you can get people who are a success in their own parish to talk about, here's what we did for our annual campaign. Here's how we do stewardship education. Here's how we do special events. Here's what we do with our school. Here's what we do with plan giving. And the sharing of materials is magnificent. It's motivational. People get to know each other and they're dying to see what happened in their sister parishes across the diocese. It's a fun, it's networking, it lifts up, it energizes the members of your parish. And this, I would even like to say, this is above and beyond the ICSC district conferences, which tend to attract more staff and the more professional level. And I'm proposing something that's more grassroots that gets your volunteers. You certainly want your staff there, but we really want to educate your stewardship councils. And the third strategy that makes stewardship simple is to give away stewardship resources, systems, and tools. Just become known that you're a font of these things that are going to make their job easy. Now, I've got a handful of those that I want to talk about as we proceed. But if you're with us, if you're with a church and you can advise them strongly to create a stewardship council, this is going to be their job description. They've got to have a chairperson who cares. It's got to be separate from the finance council. We're going to give them training and we're going to equip them. We expect them to have monthly meetings. We want them to manage stewardship education. Now, we've got a great 20-year longitudinal study from a group of churches in Wichita. They did one thing right for 20 years, and giving doubled as a percentage of per capita income from 1.2 to 2.4%, just doing a good job of stewardship education. And the primary way they did that was through lay speakers. And they spoke for 3 minutes at the end of Mass during announcements. And all they did is tell about what's a stewardship mean to me, their own individual journey. Now, this stewardship council has also got to be in charge of an annual campaign. That means they're actually going to do an annual campaign, which is going to be a shock for about half of all churches. In education, you're going to have to struggle with the fact that you might get stewardship and it might be an important part of your life, but you're the only one. Most people don't get it. They think stewardship and fundraising are synonymous, and they have no idea how to proceed. They think that going door to door is going to be your best bet, and it is not. That day is over. The closest thing to going door to door is there's a new web-based product, a service called BombBomb, and it will allow you or your pastor to create a personalized video that a pastor could do 100 of these 30-second videos in 2 hours just by clicking and speaking into the camera. It's incredible. It's a real personalization tool that exploits the best use of technology today. But your education is really going to have to bring people from the past to the present, because people come to a stewardship committee without really knowing anything about what to do and what our challenge is. And they might even not know what the heck stewardship is. Now, I suggest create a YouTube channel for your diocese and your stewardship effort. And just put those webinars, interviews, workshops, presentations at your conferences up on your own YouTube channel. Now, I have my cell phone right here by me, as everybody else. We're all kind of attached at the hip. And it's now become very easy to create a video. Certainly, you can record those 3-minute speeches by your stewardship council volunteers when they talk about what does stewardship mean to me. But you can also record the workshops that happen at your conference. You can get consultants that come from me. I'm a consultant. Most of my life is spent doing church capital campaigns, and I've learned a lot along the way. And now that I'm old, I recognize it's my responsibility to give back some of which I have learned. All of us consultants will volunteer and come and teach workshops for free. Our hope is that when you do look at doing a capital campaign, you hope that you would invite us to give a sales pitch at that time, but we know there are no guarantees. Some of us are obsessed with stewardship and have read every book and consider it a lot of fun and enjoy talking about that. That's the kind of person to get as presenters at your conference annually. People get a lot out of sharing materials. Here's what worked at my parish. why don't you try this at your parish? There's a lot of that sharing materials that is inspiring for people to just pick up and go parish to parish to learn what works for you might work for me. The third thing you can do is providing resources, systems, and tools. Now, I think everybody has got the bishop's letter on stewardship. I think it's a tremendous resource. That's a good place to begin to understand theologically what we're about and why we are about it. And it's kind of it's wonderful in there. There's I think Benedict was the one that said, and it's in that book, that your best educators about what is stewardship are lay people. I think he was the originator of that quote. And he was spot on. It does work. So I love our institutional resources. I love ICSC. As a matter of fact, there was a research project in ICSC a couple of years ago that said we need to be spending at least 2% of our budgets on stewardship. Now, when I get hired by a church, first thing I do is I get in there and find out what does their culture of stewardship look like. And I look at all their material, and I always ask, well, what's your expense budget for stewardship? And usually it is dramatically low, below that 2% threshold. It's above zero, but it's always less than a single percent. So they want to be good stewards, but you really do have to have a color brochure, and you've got to have postage, and you've got to have meals and thank you gifts. Those things are required. Now, I want to compare that 2% to the secular world. So if this conversation was about a YMCA or a Red Cross or a college, their ratio for an annual campaign is not 2%. Another way to express that would be spend 1 to raise 50. The secular ratio is spend 1 to raise 3. So you can see right away, we churches are a lot more efficient than our secular nonprofit organizations. So if we spend $1 to raise 50 and they spend $1 to raise 3, well, we should be proud. We shouldn't feel like failures. We're really quite good. So I love ICSE in that it gives all of us real insights about the business of stewardship. Now, another resource that I'll give you is the Stewardship System online portal. It is our company gift to the world. It's our hobby and our habit. We pour in there everything that we discover about stewardship from each of our churches. Right now, we've just started working on electronic giving. So there are really, for instance, 3 different ways of text giving. You can give via text, so the bill appears on your phone bill. You can click on a text, and then it will send you a follow-up text in which you then go in and fill out a link for your credit or debit card. And there's a third kind of text giving where if you've pre-registered your payment information at your church, you can click and send a text automatically and have it deducted through the information they have on file. Now, a couple years ago, I thought QR codes would be the going thing. It's a brilliant idea, hadn't caught on. I will tell you, you now, as of today, you have to encourage everyone to have a giving kiosk in the foyer of their church. And we're working on fleshing that out on the stewardship system, so you'll be able to just click a tab and learn all the different vendors and what works and how much that it costs. But I've got a 32-year-old son. He doesn't even carry cash anymore. He carries a debit card, and everything happens through that little debit card. And that is a whole generation. I learned this a couple years ago. I had a client in New York City who said, "Dennis, you're making it very hard for me to give to my church. If you don't meet me where I am, I have to go find a check. I don't know where my checkbook is. I haven't used it forever. I'm sure I have one in a file somewhere." My goodness. But this technology is moving so fast, we've got to accommodate that. So the kiosk, I learned this a couple years ago when I was in the cathedral in San Francisco. My wife and I were there early Sunday morning. It was a quiet, small group, beautiful structure. And then as we walked out, there was the giving kiosk. So if it works for them, it can certainly work for us. So the stewardship system, I'll ask Meredith here in a minute if she will click her way through that to show you what it looks like, and we'll give it to you. It's an online downloadable web-based service for a parish of all about stewardship. So you can get agendas, timelines, checklists. Well, there, she's clicked on it right there. You see the training webinar. There is really a really fun thing on there is that every Sunday it provides a cut and paste reflection on stewardship. It never asks for money. It just talks about stewardship, the idea that God's blessings are meant to flow through us. And it has two versions, ones that correspond with the readings for the weekend, and one that's not, that's more free form and poetic. So this becomes a real, and you can see down at the very bottom, it's got the annual stewardship campaign materials. Click there for annual campaign resources. So if I'm the chair of a stewardship committee and I don't know anything about it, I can go to this resource, and it has got campaign materials, it's got brochures, solicitation letters, thank you letters, banners, it's got a calendar of activities, it's got thank you cards, ambassador resources, a prayer and discernment guide, campaign prayers, banners. It's kind of got everything. So if you just have a committee, it gives them virtually everything, along with, as you can see right now, the training videos. So if you've got somebody brand new, matter of fact, this will help you with recruiting. Now that you know that everybody's going to have one, your local parish administrators got to find a chair, and the chair is going to say, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know how to do stewardship. Well, now you've got a tool. You can say to them, this will teach you what to do. It will provide a calendar and a checklist and brochures and solicitation letters and timelines and pledge cards and tools and systems and training. So it's got everything that you need. So this will make recruiting that chairperson much easier, and it'll make training the committee members much easier as well. So I'll give this resource to you, kind of our mission of our organization to help churches grow in stewardship. And one way we do it is through capital campaigns, but boy, this is the funnest thing we do, is this stewardship system. All right, so let's go back to the slides. So when you think about automating how you deliver assistance to those parishes that come to you, ICSC is a great resource. Stewardship system can be a great resource. Okay, now Meredith is telling me that I need to share screen. Hey, how about that? Technology works. Now, I want to mention a couple books, manuals, and webinars. I really like, there's a woman who's a director of stewardship in a church in Denver who has written a manual, Making Stewardship a Way of Life. And I like it because it is a solid, it's a manual. It's a couple hundred pages long, and it's got sample solicitation letters and pledge cards and everything in there. And it's something you can pick up and you can hand to somebody. It's I can't remember the price, I think $20. But it would be great if you had a box of those in your office. When someone comes to you and says, I need help, you could just say, here's a website, and here's a book you can work your way through. Now, we also, on our church development website, we have lots of webinars and video training. We try to do something just like we're going through today, once every couple of weeks, just so we can be an outlet for what we have learned. Some of my favorite books that I would recommend you hand away as gifts to your people, and you can probably get a donor to underwrite this. Henry Nouwen is the best theologian to think about stewardship, and his book, A Spirituality of Fundraising, is one of my favorites. It's a very short book, but it talks about how we are servants of the donors. We facilitate their engagement in being a disciple. And part of that is discerning God's will in your life. This is Mila Glodava's book, Making Stewardship a Way of Life. I like that. The Best Practices in Parish Stewardship by Charles Zach is the second of his pair of books. The first book is Why Catholics Don't Give. It was a very scientific analysis of Catholic churches compared to other denominations. And it really was a scalding analysis of the many things that we do not do. So the Best Practices book is meant to be the opposite of that, recommendations on how you proceed. Now, in the bottom right-hand corner, you see the book Rebuilt. which is the going rage on how to rethink your parish life. And it's just wonderful. And for them, stewardship is a critical part of a dynamic, healthy parish. So we've got a budget for it, we got a plan for it, and we have to ask people to commit. I mean, there is a cost of discipleship. It's not wishy-washy, it's not whatever. It's a lifestyle choice, and it's one that's extraordinarily important. My opinion is discipleship first and stewardship second. So once you get the idea of having a relationship with God, then the next thing you got to do is figure out how you're a conduit for God's blessings. And they've really figured out the right ways to help a parish grow dynamically and more healthy. Now, that book in the upper right-hand corner, The Stewardship System, we wrote here at Church Development, which is a compilation of some 20 years of data gathering. You can see the value proposition is how to increase generosity without fundraising. Now, we have discovered a handful of things that are just extraordinary, like the study from the Fidelity Fund that I mentioned just a little bit ago. An active volunteer will give 11 times more than a non-volunteer. So the advice I must give a local church director of stewardship is, what are you doing to create volunteer opportunities? What are you doing to create volunteer opportunities for young families who have just joined the parish? Maybe they've got young children and no time and they're busy as heck. What can you do that's a one and done? We call them episodic volunteer opportunities. What can you do something on a Saturday morning and provide daycare and entertainment and food and coffee and adult conversation, the things that they really need? Another one of the discoveries that we made is how important it is to be involved in a decision at the parish. You know, the best practices in parish stewardship are, don't just be transparent, but be engaging. With the advent of SurveyMonkey, you, the leader of a parish, can get input on a decision that costs you nothing. It takes no time. SurveyMonkey surveys are quick and easy and fun. Now, another thing we discovered is that every parish needs to ask for 4 gifts per year. Now, that's different from 52. Don't ask every single week, but you absolutely must have an annual campaign. I'm trying to think of the author of the book, Giving Matters. Might have been Gregory Lawson, but he tracked churches that did their very first annual campaign. And when a church does their first annual campaign, giving goes up by a minimum of 10%. So all of us need to have an annual campaign. Here's a subtle thing. Everybody needs to use an envelope system as well. If you don't, or if your envelopes are in a box, you're losing out on about 9% of income, 9%. If you have envelopes that are mailed into the home, your income will go up by 9% just by that reminder. So the stewardship system is going to go into all those different ways that we need to ask. There needs to be the annual campaign. Every year you need to do a capital ask, because some people only like to give to a thing like a piano or a roof or the plumbing or the boiler or school or solar panels. You got to think of an ask every single year. You have to do a Christmas ask. Sometimes we get 10% of all the giving that happens in the course of a year in that last week of the year. So let's facilitate that. And I think we always need to be asking that people remember the church in their estate plans. And we ought to ask them to tithe. Now, that's a big deal, to tithe. And if we ask for a percentage, the research from Indiana University, I happen to have that study right here. If people do indeed tithe, the average gift is $240,000. If they only remember us for a discrete thing, it's about a third of that. So we want them to tithe in their estate plans. All right, now let me move forward because we're almost out of time. Oh, this is the stewardship system. Meredith walked us through this just a minute ago. If you send me an email, I don't want to be a spammer, but if you send me an email that says you would like a subscription to this, I will send you that subscription, or you can send it to Meredith, office@church-development.com. She'll send you a password to access this, and it's free. You can get in there and download. It's all set up. Really, the only challenge is you've got to have Microsoft Publisher software so that you can get in there and modify a pre-created brochure or a newsletter to insert the name of your parish and your logo. And then you can modify perhaps the column from the pastor or the picture on the front page. But it's meant to be very easy. I love it. Now, it follows the 7 elements of the stewardship system, which we discovered are the keys to generosity without fundraising. Now, before we wrap up, let me answer a couple more questions that have come down the pike before we wrap up. Before we even talk about success, which I'm a big believer in starting with the end in mind, looking at the why, and really having a clear sense of where we are headed. The next 2 questions really have to do with this slide right now. And the first question I want to talk about is, why don't pastors get stewardship? Now, I hear that a lot. Sometimes we will work in a parish on a capital campaign where we can't even get the pastor to attend events. He doesn't even want to be on the committee. He thinks stewardship is fundraising, and it's distasteful and horrid. Well, most people don't like fundraising. Most people don't like talking about fundraising. And so that washes over into the stewardship world. So they don't talk about this subject in seminary, so it's going to be up to us to educate our pastors what stewardship is. And we've just got to repeat 1 Peter 4:10. Everything that we have in our lives is a gift from God, and we've got to figure out how we can be a conduit for those blessings. Now, for you as the director of stewardship, having an annual conference and inviting your pastors to that, if they just come for lunch or they just learn more about the idea of stewardship, that would be an incredible blessing. Now, it's kind of fun, but there's a lot of secular research that supports that as well. There's a researcher in economics called, name is Mahaley, Sixcent Mahaley. He coined the term flow. And he says, people who have that sense of God's blessings flow through them have the same level of endorphins when they write a check or sign a pledge card as an Olympic athlete does when they're high jumping 7 feet. Gregory Lawson, in the book Give to Live, he discovered that people who give away more than 2% of their income have a higher level of T cell production than people who give less than 2%. Isn't that interesting? I always love it when secular science supports something that we know from our theology is the absolute right thing to do. Second question is, why doesn't our church have a budget for stewardship right now? Well, we're fighting an uphill battle. And you know that 2% is your target. And I have bad news. The bad news is the future, it's going to be more difficult than it has been in the past. And I just look within my own family. My children do not have the same relationship with church that I did growing up. Walking to church, being at church a couple times a week, they look at church a little bit differently. So we have got to do more and be better at inviting them to become engaged in the church. So time marches on. We had better adapt or we will be left behind. Now, let's shift. We're about to wrap up here in just about 2 minutes. What success looks like, this is where we are headed. We want our parishes to have a culture of stewardship. So we use the language of stewardship. People know what it is. People know that God's blessings flow through us. Therefore, we got to look for ways that we can do God's work here on earth. So we need to be vigilant in searching those things out. Another indicator of success is your stewardship council is busy, not just meeting every month, but they've got their fingers in everything. They're deliberately involved in welcoming people into the parish. One of the things Zach discovered is a parish that had a busy, active, assertive, welcoming effort had giving that was 9% above average. So what does that tell you? Let us all be welcomers to those people who are just visiting our parish. Now, another big factor we've learned from the Protestant world is being in small groups is enormously important. I feel very lucky at my church. I've got a men's prayer group. That's about a dozen guys. We get together every month, and we really become like brothers. We know each other's lives and what's going on, and we share our faith journey. It's become a real source of support for me. It's not too formal. We always have a reading. We have scripture. We've got a reflection by somebody, and then we share. And it's kind of the highlight hour and a half of my month. Another indicator of success would be everybody's a volunteer at something. Now, if they are a volunteer, they're probably going to give more, and your average gift is probably going to be 2.4% or more of their income to the parish. Now, another thing you would discover is that when there is a funeral, somebody will have remembered the parish in their estate plans. Now, we've got to ask them before they do that, but if they do it, they would be an enormous blessing to the parish. Any last questions before we go? We're going to wrap this up in 1 minute. Now, before you go, I've got a couple more webinars coming up. Building a champion team. What's a stewardship committee look like in action? That's coming up on March 1st. And then Q&A with me with this screen. And I get, since we've served a couple hundred parishes over the past 26 years, and I try to share what I have learned with everybody, I get a lot of questions every single week. So I've collected my favorite questions that I'm going to share with people on that on the 22nd, and I welcome you to join us as well. You can also spread this around. I'll send you another announcement about this to our whole mailing list, and feel free to forward that, because we're our goal this year is to do a webinar every 2 weeks in which we just give away for free that which we have learned about stewardship. Now, if I can help you, if you'd like me to come be a workshop presenter in your diocese, give me a call. It's fun to me. I really enjoy it. I feel like I've discovered a lot of worthwhile things from the many parishes that I have served, and it's a pleasure to share those things. Now, if you'd like a subscription to the stewardship system, send me or Meredith an email and we will respond, and you've got access. It's about $14,000 worth of material and training workshops and resources that'll make your stewardship councils at your parishes a great deal more effective, which bottom line has to happen before people understand stewardship, which is an absolutely critical part of discipleship.